Visit www.flaskup.com for all your Mr. Pandaria raiding guide needs. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Mr. Pandaria raiding guide, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at the 10-man normal mode version of Durumu the Forgotten in the Throne of Thunder raid. Now in order to complete this fight we use 2 tanks, 2 to 3 healers and the rest DPS. It doesn't really matter if you bring ranged or melee, they're both as good as each other on this fight really. Now this again is another one of these cool fights in the Throne of Thunder. It does require quite a bit of coordination, but once you've got that locked down, it'll be a clean kill and it's enjoyable. That's the best part about it. It is actually an enjoyable encounter. So first of all we're going to take a look at the abilities that your tanks are going to have to deal with in this fight. And there is kind of only one main ability really, and it goes by the name of Hard Stare. And this is where Durumu will attack his current target for 150% weapon damage as physical damage, and he will also apply 2 debuffs onto them. The first debuff is called Serious Wound, and this will cause the tank to receive 10% less healing per application. Now the big keyword there is per application, so as you can guess this is a stacking debuff on the tank. And the second ability that will get applied to the tank is Arterial Cut, and this will cause the tank to suffer 40,000 physical damage every second until they've been restored to full health. So obviously those 2 abilities are going to work together there in order to try and kill the tank. What you need to do is try and out-heal the healing decrease on the tank in order to remove the buff that's going to be dealing quite a bit of damage to them. I recommend you go for about 4 or 5 stacks of the Serious Wound debuff on your tank. Now your tank should also be aware of a second ability which is called Gaze, and this is where if he has no melee targets he will gaze at every random player in the raid and inflict 50% weapon damage as physical damage. So the boss pretty much needs to be tanked at all times is all that is saying. So even though Durumu is one big Cyclops floating head effectively, this fight has got quite a bit to do with eyes as it would seem. And there are 3 different sets of eyes that the raid needs to be aware of in general, and then there's a bigger one later on which I'll talk about later on in the video. So the 3 general ones go by the name of Mind's Eye, which will cast an ability called Force of Will. Now this will be kind of a targeted ability that you need to move out of, and you'll be able to see where it's going to be cast because there'll be a purple line going through the raid. Now if you do stand in this purple line it will knock you back to the edge of the room, and you just don't want to get that. I believe it does quite a bit of damage to you as well, but it could just be a knockback. The next eye is called Hungry Eye, and this will cast a life drain on players. Now the life drain will stun the player for 15 seconds, and any health that is drained from the player will be given back to Durumu as additional health. Now the longer life drain is cast on that player, the more life will be drained from them. So what you need to do in order to combat this ability is get people to kind of stand in front of each other in order to soak the life drain ability. It's quite easy. You do need to swap it maybe every 3 to 4 seconds so that he's not getting healed for too much. Otherwise you're just going to probably end up causing a wipe due to how much healing he does end up getting, or someone will die because they've taken too much damage. And the final eye is called Appraising Eye, and this will cast an ability called Lingering Gaze, and this will be targeted on 2 random players in the raid, and it will throw a shadow missile at them. Now when it lands on the player it will explode for 50,000 shadow damage, and this will inflict anyone within 15 yards. This will also create a purple void zone on the floor, and if you stand in this void zone you will suffer 75,000 shadow damage every second, and you're slowed by 30%. Now these will not despawn until the end of the encounter, so what you need to do is if you get you get like a little arrow put on your head, and also if you're using Deadly Boss mods you'll get a big message in the middle of your screen saying move now. But yeah, what you need to do is if you get this on, you just move to the outside of the room and just let the debuff drop there, because that way all of the pools are out of the way and no one's going to run into them by accident. This is also key for later on in the fight, and I'm going to explain that in a moment. Now the next main ability for this boss goes by the name of Disintegration Beam, and this is a This is fun, this part, but it's also deadly at the same time, and I do die in it unfortunately, so feel free to laugh at me for that. And what this is the boss will cast a little purple line in front of him. Now when he does this, you need to all stack up in front of the boss and stand on this purple line. Then after about 5 seconds, the beam has a cast time on it, so after about 4 to 5 seconds you'll see some purple lines spawning on either the right hand side or the left hand side of this beam. This indicates which way around the boss you're going to move, so it's either going to be clockwise or counterclockwise. And what he will do is he will fill the room with this deadly purple stuff that you don't want to stand in, and it creates a maze within this purple stuff that you need to walk through in order to not take damage. However, if you do end up going in the purple stuff, you take 125,000 arcane damage, so you need to be careful of that, and like I say, I do die. And there will also be moderate raid damage going on throughout this phase. And what we did is we got a Death Knight, I think it was, to go ahead slightly and try and work out where the actual maze path was. And you can reduce the damage that you take by using abilities such as AMS and possibly AMZ, Anti-Magic Shield and Anti-Magic Zone if need be. And this phase, the Disintegration Beam phase, will end once you've made a full rotation around the boss. So this is just mainly figure out where the maze is and don't die, he says. And now we're going to take a look at another one of the main phases of this fight, and this goes by the Light Spectrum. Well, if you look in the Dungeon Journal, it's called the Light Spectrum. I'm going to call it the Light Spectrum phase because it makes explaining the fight a lot easier. Now, at the start of this phase, he will spawn a blue eye, a red eye, and a yellow eye. And these will cast 3 very, very, very shiny colour beams onto 3 different players in the raid. This will be a blue beam, a red beam, and a yellow beam. Now, you don't need to really bother with the blue beam, you just need to make sure there's more than one person standing in it. Well, in all of the beams really, because if no one is in the beams, they will deal a lot of damage to players. It's 200,000 frost, nature, or fire damage. However, if people are standing in the beams, it will split 125,000 damage equally between everyone that's in them. So as I was saying, what we did is we got the person with the blue beam to stand perfectly still where they are. You don't want them to move, and we'll explain why in a second. The yellow beam just moves around the room, so you need to get 2 or 3 people to stay in that at all times and just split the damage between them. And the red beam is controlled by a player, so wherever they move, the red beam will move as well. Again, you need players to stay in this and split the 125,000 damage. Now, these beams have a purpose, and the reason they have a purpose is because there will be 3 mobs that spawn around the outside of the room. And this is either going to be a red mob, which goes by the name of Crimson Fog, or a blue mob, which goes by the name of Azure Fog. You'll get 3 red mobs and 1 blue mob. Now, the blue mob is pretty deadly. You just want to ignore this, and this is why you want to keep the blue beams still. The beams conveniently reveal these mobs. Now, as the beams are spawning, you'll see a little red flash on the ground where the mobs are roughly going to spawn. So what we did is we made sure people had macros in order to put world markers down, or have their world marker tab open in order to place them where they thought they were going to be, because you want this phase to end as fast as possible, otherwise people are going to end up taking way too much damage. Now what you want to do is make sure that people are moving around in the circle with the yellow beam at all times, make sure some people are standing dead still in the blue beam at all times, and then your red beam needs to go to the world markers where you thought that the Crimson Fog was, and you need to nuke down that mob as soon as possible. Now, this mob will cast an ability at random players which will inflict 60,000 physical damage. You just have to heal through this, unfortunately. And if you are to move the red marker onto him, the red beam onto him, and then move it away, he will cast Crimson Bloom, which will inflict 300,000 fire damage to all players. So keep the red beam on top of the mob until you've killed him off. Once you've killed all 3 mobs off, this phase will end and you'll just continue the fight as normal. So you need to get the mobs nuked ASAP pretty much, move to the next mob, nuke it, move to the next mob, nuke it as soon as possible. That's all there is to this phase. And it's a brilliant fight. I mean, we enjoyed it, I enjoyed it, even though I might have died, but we'll just ignore that. So that's going to do it for this raiding guide. As always, thank you for watching, and if you are interested in future Mists of Pandaria raiding guides, then please do feel free to subscribe to the channel.